Hey there, welcome to episode 77 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, the managing director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, a Nevada nonprofit public charity, 501c3. So, episode 77, amazing. We're recording this on Tuesday, August 6, 2024. The time, as we commence, is 1:40 in the afternoon. Why so late? Actually, truth be known, I wrote this whole thing last night, and I was pondering, should I do it at night? I was sleepy, so I figured, all right, I'll get up and do it. My voice has been fighting with me in the morning. We do have some particulates in the air, still a little bit. Who knows? It's very warm, not like it was, but so we'll see. We'll see how my voice holds up for this. But I've had some tea. Let's get it on. Today's title: Municipals. It's like municipals, but your friends. Kind of a play on principal. Principal is your pal. So you don't type principal, PLE, which people do anyway. So hopefully wherever you find your audio programs, you have been able to locate the episode description for today's episode, the show notes, and a few links. There's quite a few links today, actually. There's the usual 3 that I've been putting on there lately. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Proof that I can count. 9 extra, so that brings it up to 12. This episode may be a little bit long. And before we start, I will say I'm going to give some backstory on the Brigade program, Code for America, top down, bottom up. The point, though, is working with municipalities, municipal partners, and how that also can be problematic, which is why we are not taking that approach with Innovate for Vegas Foundation project designs initially. And I'll get into that. I think I'll get into that. I'll just say it right now. The best way to get someone to pay attention and to work with you in things like this is to do it and have them come to you. Nowhere more true than in Vegas. If you approach anyone and have an ask of any kind, you better be famous or rich or both. There better be free food. There better be something in it for them. Or it must be overwhelmingly attractive, perhaps. So that can be tricky. But on the other hand, if you do things, don't worry about what they think, whoever they are, in your example of what I'm talking about, and then they come to you, well, then the glove is on the other foot. The shoe is on the other hand, one of those. And now the discussion is about how we can work together, not how can you help us work with you. And I've tried that here. It's a challenge. So today's episode, Municipals, the summary, which I'll read to you. I usually read it verbatim, but sometimes I ad-lib a little bit. So let's see how this goes. The origin story of Brigades and CfA, which is Code for America. I should expand that. Maybe I'll edit that. Includes working with municipal partners to advance community elevation projects based on what one might hope is insight concerning need, gaps, requirements, and so on. That is to say, the municipal partner should have some idea what the needs are, and then the volunteer organization or the nonprofit that's driving volunteer programs as brigades, cohorts, would be able to say, well, what can we help us to help you? Okay, that's a little ad lib there. Is this the best way to go? We don't do that, so we are finding out. So like I said, Innovate for Vegas Foundation, we composed our initial projects based on a Smart City Plan, Smart City Forward document, which I've talked about in previous episodes. So rather than approaching the city government, there's the county, Clark County, there's City of Las Vegas, there's City of Henderson, there's City of North Las Vegas, there's Mesquite and Boulder City, and there's some other ones. So you can go to the cities, but oftentimes this is a foreign notion. And even though there was a Code for Vegas some 10 years ago or so, and even though Code for Vegas in its original form, which I've also talked about previously, did some real work as far as establishing the open data program that is still operating today with a skeleton crew of, I think, one, if that one person is still working on it, for the city of Las Vegas. And that was working directly with Code for America. So it's not completely new even here. But on the other hand, apparently, and I wasn't there at the time, some 10 years ago, I was just moving to the city of Las Vegas, 11 years ago this month. And I didn't know anything about this, but I don't believe that a Code for Vegas would have approached the city of Las Vegas and have been welcomed with open arms. But when a Code for America organization, large, at the time, reasonably well known, says, hey, would you like to work on an open data program? I think you get a little bit more grease on the wheels. So it's something to think about. If you are putting together a cohort, or if you have a cohort, maybe you're a former brigade, maybe you were given projects, given in quotes, I have my air quotes on right now, given projects from top down from Code for America. Maybe you were working on safety net programs when the 911 project that they were driving was in effect, some other benefits programs, some record sealing for cannabis and other legal records and so on. So these kinds of projects were, I believe, originated. So I wasn't around for this, but it's my understanding that these projects would originate through Code for America, and then they would be worked on by volunteers in the brigades. But the projects were managed by, usually, I think, from what I've come to learn and from what I understand. By the way, this is not really attacking Code for America. They don't do brigades anymore, so it's a learning experience. But a paid employee, an employee of Code for America, would drive projects. So when that goes away, which we'll talk about briefly, it's now up to the cohorts, or the former brigades, if you like, but we can just drop brigade, cohorts of civic volunteers who either have worked together on community elevation projects or are getting together and want to, and it could even be one person. Sometimes you have to start with one. So yeah, let's get on with it. This might be a long show, so I'll remind you that you can listen to 2x or whatever speed you like, and you can also pause the show. I've been told before, oh my God, anything longer than 20 minutes is crazy. Like, okay, pause at 20 minutes and then listen to 20 minutes more, and whatever your time on the treadmill is, etc. Got a long drive? I got you. The links for today's show, the usual three, are homepage, innovateforvegas.org. It is literally bubbling up the list on things I need to update. It's in its proof of existence mode. So it's a one-pager that shows, which is out of date now. Sean Looker no longer on our board. He did his time, helped us get up and running. He was on the original Code for Vegas. He was co-founder and co-captain of the original Code for Vegas 10 years ago or so. So he was friendly to us and to the effort and was very helpful and gave us some of the backstory and so on along the way. So he doesn't live in Vegas either. So it was nice of him to put some time and energy behind this reboot. And so, yeah, so there's a picture of Sean Looker on there. Sean Looker is a director emeritus, and we do have a new board member, so I need to get his picture and so on. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are some other things we need to do, including making this audio program accessible in a more useful way from our website. Right now there is an embedded MP3 player from Spotify. It does the job. We should be the primary point of publication. And you know what? When you're one programmer, or maybe you have some other people working on projects, you should be able to cook up something more interesting than a straight one-page HTML website. So a little self-deprecation there. So Innovate for Vegas Foundation homepage, Innovate for Vegas. No for. It's FOR spelled out, no dashes, hyphens, spaces, etc. .org. Our GitHub organization, org, is at github.com/innovateforvegas, FOR, again. Does not end with org. So it's our GitHub org, but it's on github.com/innovateforvegas. There's a link to that from our homepage. So if you can get to our homepage, you can get to that. That's where we keep our project repositories. And as I'm speaking right now, we're in the progress of rolling out a better, I'll say designed, what we call Agile for Volunteers. If you are a fan of Agile development process or principles of Agile, if you have been forced to use Agile-like methods, usually Agile in name only, I'm sorry. But Agile for Volunteers takes some of the useful parts of Agile and tries to fit it into a scheme where you don't have employees. So look for look for Agile for Volunteers to be sort of squeezed into all of our existing projects like Open Transit, Smart Social, My Muni, Welcome, Open Data Capture Platform. We got to get Challengers launched. That's a sort of a low-hanging fruit thing. So anyway, yeah, all of our projects are in our GitHub organization as repositories. There's a few different things. I think we're up to like 18 or 19 repositories now. So over time, over the very near term, all of our projects will be a little bit easier to figure out for people who want to jump in and work on stuff. And that brings us to Project Act. That is also on GitHub, github.com/project dash or hyphen act, ACT. So project dash act. Actually, technically hyphen. It's the typical minus sign on your keyboard. Project Act, the Autonomous Cohort Tessellation, was originally, and still is, the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project, which was originally cooked up in October of 2022 to begin enabling brigades to become, former brigades, to become independent civic volunteer entities, cohorts, and to be autonomous so that they could do some work that they wanted to do, deal with their own policies, their own best practices, reach out and advertise themselves to their local communities, all these crazy ideas, I know. So born of some insider info that I received, when Code for Vegas Foundation rebooted from the original Code for Vegas, we got the domain. We were just going to reboot, and we were in discussions with Code for America, the brigade, sort of onboarding folks, and they said, well, we're going through a revisioning, capital V, I think it was, revisioning for a brigade program, so we're going to hold off. So Code for Vegas Foundation formed as an independent nonprofit rather than joining Code for America as a brigade. Technically, Code for Vegas, the original, was not a brigade. I think the brigade program was still either in its early days or not called the brigade program, I think, but it wasn't quite what it would become at the time. So we were essentially saying, hey, we want to get back into the fold here. And they said, hang on. So we said, let's just form our own nonprofit. So we formed our nonprofit corporation in June of 2022 and received our determination 501c3 status in October, retroactive to June. So we have been a independent, autonomous cohort since June of 2022. So our idea was, hey, we should help other people do that because that insider info was more than one brigade asked, queried, wondered aloud, how come Code for Vegas gets to be independent? I think they were upset that they were using the Code for name pattern, which is fine. Turns out Code for, quote unquote, Code for, end quote, is code for programmers. But civic volunteerism is not only about programming. So our changing our name to Innovate for Vegas fit in generally, I'm going to say nearly perfectly with our purpose and our goals and some city or some local branding about being an innovation hub or an innovation destination, more likely. Hackathons in the innovation center, in the innovation district. So it fit nicely, and innovation can be anything. And I often speak of innovation in food and beverage, which is very popular in Vegas in general. So you can be innovative in any number of areas. It doesn't have to be code. And we try to emphasize that all the time. So Project Act, the goal of Project Act is to enable a decentralized, bottom-up, grassroots, if you like. We'll call it a protocol. Not really infrastructure, because it's supposed to be, infrastructure is left to the user. Because we don't want to impose too many rules. So it's pretty thin, but it's some old school, think RSS feeds, very similar to RSS feeds, to enable discovery of other cohorts, right? So if you may be thinking, oh, it's just us or me working on something, if only I could reach out and find others with a similar bent, whether they're a civic volunteer organization or whether they're working on something similar to what I'm working. Wouldn't that be convenient? Maybe we could collaborate. So Project Act, the tessellation side, is a tessellation is a mosaic. So it's visually, it'll be a literal representation of cohorts around the country, the world, the universe. Imagine a logo. Our logo is a hexagonal seal-like thing where each of the hexagons is representative of some of our tenants, and there is some space for more hexagons. We'll have to get on that. But any cohort or even an individual who creates a little logo that we can, include on the tessellation would then be visible, a form of advertising, but also a form of recognition. Hey, these are people that are working on cool stuff for you, community elevation. And then same goes for projects. You can connect, like, hey, there are people doing transit related projects, food desert related projects, access to resources and services. The list goes on and on. Data equity projects. So if you could find those projects, you might be interested in collaborating. So the Project Act goal: connect, communicate, collaborate. 3 C's, no waiting. So you can check that out there. Very early days, but it will be interesting to see where it goes. Now on to the links for today's show. The Code for America local initiatives is sort of replacing, if you search for Code for America Brigades, I believe it goes to brigade or brigades.codeforamerica.org, which then redirects to this link. And it's their local initiative. So it's projects at the local level. I will say, I have not checked on this in over a year, but Clark County, which contains Las Vegas, someday it would like to rename itself allegedly to Las Vegas County. So we'll see what happens there. So you'll always be in Las Vegas. Most of the time, if you are in Las Vegas, you're not in Las Vegas. Did you know that? The Code for America local initiatives includes record sealing for cannabis, legal, like incarceration and so on. So sealing of records and whatnot. Cannabis is basically legal, decriminalized or legalized. I'll leave that to you. But I have someone I would talk to about that for the inner workings of the pros and cons of each. But either way, so sealing records so that the quote-unquote mistakes of the past, which are no longer mistakes, can be effectively expunged from one's permanent record. So that was a deal that Clark County approved to work with Code for America. This was before the Brigade program was sunset. So I'm not sure who's working on that now. Who knows? But you can go there and you can read about their local initiative efforts. And the sunset only took place officially. I mean, the announcement was made in January of 2023. And then I believe the pushback was, this is going to take more than 14 days to sort out. So they essentially the sun was setting through 2023. Again, we were not affected by this. We were completely autonomous before and still are. So, but it was my understanding that it was sort of through the year, services would start to end of life or be removed from the menu. So the Slack was a big one. Are you in the Code for America Slack? And then Code for America, as a fiscal sponsor of its various brigades, enabled various services you would expect for a nonprofit, and free Slack, free this, free that. Those were going away. So by the end of 2023, no more brigades. So I'm not sure who's working on local initiatives now. It'd be interesting to dive into that a little bit. Now, Jennifer Polka, the founder of the original Code for Vegas, Code for America Labs, a California nonprofit, 501c3. So Code for America Labs, and then I don't know if they have a DBA that they do business as Code for America, but that's their branding. So Code for America Labs founder Jennifer Polka, P-A-H-L-K-A. It's an interesting article. It's from 2016. So Code for America was 7 years old, I believe. And in 2016, Code for Vegas would have been about 2 years old, I think. Although I think it was already headed for the big pause by 2016, I think. I can't remember. Again, I was not part at that time. But in 2016, you can read the interview, five questions. She has a good quote in there, which I'll read. There's an excerpt of it, and it forms the title. So the excerpt, which appears in the top part of the article, you could call it the deck, or it's maybe more of a tease if you're familiar with classic news layout and presentation. But it's technically they're using it as the title, I guess, because it's appears in the URL. Regardless of who is in the White House, we have work to do from the bottom up. So that's something interesting. We'll get to that in the full. I think it's like a paragraph, but it's not much longer than that. So I'll get into that and how that applies to what we're talking about today. But it is an interesting 5 questions, and it does touch on the notion of working with local partners, municipal partners, municipals, and the issues with scaling and so on. And this was in 2016, and Jennifer Polka would later not be the CEO of Code for America Labs. That would be handed off to Amanda Renteria. And then that's the person who ultimately would send out or make the decision and then send out the, hey, guess what, guys? Small change. I do recommend flipping through that if you're curious. And also Jennifer Polka, somewhere, I think it's on Medium, there's an article about the founding of and the motivations and so on. I read that back when we were thinking about doing this. Maybe I should have read it twice. But interesting, the origin story. It's always interesting to know history, so we are not doomed to repeat it. That's not the actual quote, but Code for America Next Chapter for Brigades is a Code for America news item. It basically says, hey, what comes next for the Brigade network? The next chapter. And that doesn't seem to be getting much driving. So I think it's been a hands-off, good luck. Again, Code for Vegas Foundation, and then now Innovate for Vegas Foundation never rejoined and was not part of and did not experience the sunset. So we've been spectating and trying to do our own thing. So I can't speak to that as someone who was directly affected, but it is something we're still addressing with Project ACT. So indeed, what is the next chapter? What next for civic volunteers? There's a statescoop.com article, Code for America Former Brigades Regroup. So there was an attempt, I don't think it's ended, and I'm not trying to editorialize here, but the Alliance of Civic Technologists started having some discussions. They were going to form their own top-level nonprofit organization. There were fiscal sponsorships and different efforts to essentially recreate the Code for America hierarchy or methodologies or infrastructure or org chart or however you want to view it, different parts. I don't know if they were trying to recreate 100% of it, but I participated in some discussions in their Discord server. They had, as far as I know, they had a meeting in June, I think it was, of 2023, kind of a kickoff meeting. I don't know that it's gotten very far. They do have a website. Their website looks better than ours, definitely. And it does seem to have kind of stalled. I have a theory. I don't know if I'm not trying to attack them. I will say that when I learned about ACT, the Alliance of Civic Technologists, I spoke to our group, which was our board, and I said, well, I don't want Project ACT, Alliance of, sorry, I don't want that to happen. Project ACT, the Autonomous Cohort Tessellation or Transformation. The transformation, the Alliance for Civic Technologists, ACT, seems like they're going to be doing something to cover that. So there's really no need for Project ACT, transformation. So basically tossed it, deleted the organization on GitHub. There was something else we basically said, okay, they're going to do a real thing. They have some former brigades behind it, so we'll see what happens. And then here we are. So Project ACT, there will be a website, projectact.info. It is not intended to be like a website you would visit on the regular. It's more aimed at the autonomous cohorts. So ideally it will be sort of a services endpoint for people organizing civic volunteer cohorts and similar, or even individuals who are interested in participating in community elevation projects. So Project ACT initially paused, but what's next for civic volunteers as they regrouped was going to be the Alliance of Civic Technologists. Somewhere in there, I think it was September, published on September 11th, maybe apropos, there were CfA, Code for America, layoffs, and some realizations that came from that. So there's the top 5 ways CFA leadership abandoned values. So you can read through that. My personal take is they moved into more of a top-down central planning regime, credit given to employees over volunteers. That's the tip of the iceberg of, right there. For me, that was enough. Like, oh, I'm glad we didn't actually rejoin. But that happened. So layoffs in the midst of the sunsetting. I call it a rug pull often. I think it was that feeling. It had that feeling for some, like, what? You're literally tearing the rug out from under me, and I'm going now to fall on the ground because I was dependent on focusing my civic volunteer proclivities into the projects that we had in place. So names had to be changed. So there's no more code for or hack for. You have to change to something like open. One of our board members, Mary, is the executive director of what was Code for Fresno, which is now Open Fresno, for example, in Fresno, Madera County, California, for example. So some organizations that were under the, I was going to say thumb, but umbrella of the Brigade program would have to go through a name change process. They would have to lose out on the branding and the awareness in some cases. All those services were going away, as I mentioned. So you're kind of, hopefully you have a code because you're out in the cold all of a sudden. My impression. Again, that didn't happen to us. So CFA layoffs and realizations, like, this is not great. The take home. The Alliance of Civic Technologists has a website, civictechnologists.org. So I have a link there, no spaces, Civic Technologist, GISTS at the end there, .org. There's a book that Jennifer Palka published, I think it was about a little over a year ago, Recoding America, sort of what comes next. Let me get some water here. I read the book, cover to cover, and it really seems to be in the top-down mode. There's some lament, there's an expression of frustration about how things don't work, some possibilities of things that worked to make things work. That is like pick a program, a federal level program, took this long because of this, this, and this. So if you change the way this process works, inject a little technology, I guess, app development, some workflow, some process design, you could make it better. You could make it easier for normal people to interact with, etc. So the book was mostly about that. Unfortunately, it really was taking a top down, like how can, federal recoding America. By the way, America includes the United States. So if we're going to be pedantic, it could have been recoding the U.S. Anyway, so Recoding America, I'm not going to say don't read it, but I will say it does seem to be leaning into some of the changes that I think are not useful, do not make for an effective civic volunteer infrastructure to enable and encourage multiple civic volunteer cohorts spread around, a geography like the United States or even larger. So empowering, enabling, encouraging, my opinion, should start small and work up. So the Recoding America book does seem to take a top-down view of things. I don't know if that's, a book called Recoding America, the implication, production by Street, the implication is that there is something to be said about normal volunteers, like in the Code for America configuration. How can volunteer contributions to trying to make things better actually work to recode America? Sticking with coding, I think there's more to it than that. That's why we should be innovating America, reanimating America. So central planning, aka planned economy. So the Wikipedia page is planned economy. Central planning is when the resources and processes and funding and general management of, you could say Code for America was an economy, right? There are inflows, there are products and services, there are people doing work, there are resources in place to enable people to do that work, there are people overseeing that work. So if you want to view it as a economy, then I call it a centrally planned economic entity, or an economy of brigades that were part of it. Exactly how they were part of it, of course, comes into some question when you sunset everything overnight. Not overnight, over the course of a year. But my view has been the top-down approach. This has been proved time immemorial, the trying to control from a central point, or control, manage the goings-on at city, neighborhood level, nearly impossible. And this is governments or entities trying to exert some sort of managerial oversight at scale can become very tricky, and it becomes slow and lags and inefficient, and maybe that's how things got to where they are. Finally, the forgiveness versus permission quote, which I will reference later. It is sometimes attributed to Grace Hopper. It's also attributed to others. Grace Hopper used the quote. You must know what I'm speaking of. I will refer to it later. But the quote has different origins. So you can read the quoteinvestigator.com. Link is given. I'm starting to like that site. They seem to do pretty deep dives. Hopefully they're accurate. They certainly do the work of typing in a lot of stuff. So that's our link list, our list of links. A linked list is a different thing, but a list of links apropos to today's topic. So let's get started with a great idea, but an unsustainable implementation. Code for America. Jennifer Palka started with a fine premise in 2009. The 5 questions interview from 2016 hints at this and ends on a solid note. This is the quote I was referring to, and so I will, again, it's excerpted as a maybe it's a subhead. I don't know. It's just an excerpt of a quote, so maybe it's more of a tease. And this is the quote: regardless of who is in the White House, we have work to do from the bottom up and from the outside in. That's what we've been doing for the last 6 years. So it was founded in 2009. The interview was in December of 2016, so 6 years. That's what we've been doing for the last 6 years, and that strategy is more important than ever now in lots of contexts. We can keep helping government work better in cities, counties, and states around the country. Unfortunately, Code for America Labs is a Nevada, that's us, is a California nonprofit. Now, it's not unfortunate that they're in California, but it's unfortunate that it is in a single location attempting to drive, and this was in 2016, attempting to drive a nationwide network of civic volunteers, of projects, project management, acquiring new projects, managing donations and sponsorships of projects, collaborating with municipal partners in these different localities, etc., etc. So personally, I would start thinking, that doesn't get easier. So unfortunately, a national scale nonprofit entity, Code for America Labs, working at a variety of governmental levels with different focus resolutions. So you may be working with a county government on trying to solve a big problem that's only in that county, or you may be working with a county government, Clark County, for example, to implement something like this record sealing tool or process that is also used elsewhere. So the focus area has a larger scope than just one locality. It can get tricky really quickly, though, as I said. So as Polka says in the interview way back in 2016, which I just read the quote, it likely only got trickier and trickier, right? That brings us to the current regime and the sunsetting of the volunteer program, the disappointment expressed along the way, and the, should I use the word shambles? I don't know. In recent years, it would seem the Code for America, an attempt to get the band back together with the Alliance of Civic, together the Alliance of Civic Technologists, and I'm making a list here. Geez, like I said, I wrote this last night. In recent years, it would seem that Code for America, an attempt to get the band back together with the Alliance of Civic Technologists, and laments in Polka's latest writing, that was the Recoding America, are tending toward top-down, dealing with federal government scale and bureaucracy, perhaps losing sight SITE, should be SIGHT, of the statements in that excerpt. In other words, I'll read that again. We can keep helping government work better in cities, counties, and states around the country. So yeah, start with cities, start with neighborhoods. Centrally planning, all of that gets tricky. So coincidentally, the next section of my notes, top-down central planning. So this is something I've talked about before in this program context, and I talk about it in general. But let us be very clear. A nonprofit entity making project agreements at any scale, passing work off to volunteer cohorts, exerting managerial control and enforcing fiscal sponsor oversight as leverage, as it turns out, is not the best way to empower local innovators. That is definitely turned out to be true. I think while that is, I'm expressing my opinion right now, I've talked to some people that agree with that, so your mileage may vary. But I think once you say, oh, sorry, you're out of luck, you got to go. Like, but I'm a volunteer. I'm trying to make my community better by working. Yeah, you can still do that, just not here. Make sure you leave your name and your badge, your organization name and your badge before you leave. So, yeah, not good. In a centrally planned economy, decisions at the top drive the economy from the top. And as it happens, a lot of credit was directed to the top, the first credits anyway. So the civic volunteers were, and I've talked about this before, were not always given top tier billing. There's not always an easy or really bare minimum way to see who actually contributed to a project. And when you think about it, if you're a civic volunteer, if you're volunteering your time to work on a project, maybe you're a junior level, just getting started in a career or a career change, having something on your resume is useful. And, if you've ever been involved with the motion picture industry, I have not, those credits, the writing credits and so on, those matter. Those matter a lot. So contributing to civic volunteer, open source, community elevation projects should always have attribution as a job zero. Like people who spend their time and give their time, effort, and expertise should at least have their name on it. And those people should be celebrated. Volunteer time is gold. It should be, light should be shone upon it at every turn, at all times, even at night. So to me, directing attention, credit, press releases, and other mentions to employees of the nonprofit Code for America Labs was not the best way to empower, encourage, enable civic volunteers to contribute their time, effort, and expertise to these community elevation projects. So paid employees directing volunteers, and then the volunteers don't get credit for their work. That sums it up. Not a fan. And these are my opinions. Again, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me. These are opinions based on my observations. When the top is where leadership is, the top must remain at the expense of those at the bottom. Sunset. The ones who are all about bottom up. The ones who were like, hey, I want to help my community. I want to be a volunteer, give my time, effort, expertise. Wait, what? You're shutting us down? I can't do this anymore? Yeah. We're going to keep going, but you can't. Sorry. Not a fan of that either. So my editorialism is coming out. Yes. Reflexively, perhaps, recreating this top-down structure would make sense. Though it may be more difficult to recreate than initially imagined, possibly because the rug was only recently pulled for the past time. Recently. If you had a bad experience, whatever it is, there's either the get back up on the horse and whatever, or there's the, do I want to spend my time, effort, and expertise on civic volunteer projects when this is how it turns out? I didn't even get credit for what I was working on, et cetera, et cetera. So going back is not necessarily the best way forward for some, for all. And I think based on my discussions, that is sort of driving a decrease in civic volunteerism, civic volunteer participation. Existing former brigades are seeing lighter turnout, less volunteer tendency. Newcomers don't always stick around. We definitely had that here in Vegas. Room full of people expressing interest and never to be seen or heard from again until the next time when a different room full of 30 people or so coming to kick the tires. Oh, I don't want to actually do anything. Recoding America is a lofty goal and worth considering, but do we start at the top again? I don't think so. I mean, it's great to look at federal programs that could use improvement. There's a lot of things that the federal government needs to be addressing. As I'm speaking today, Google has been deemed a monopoly based on its search engine marketplace domination and some of the practices it has indulged in. We have people like Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission busting down doors in Elliot Ness fashion almost to rid the world of antitrust behaviors. I noticed, I want to say like a week or two ago, the FTC is starting to look at grocery prices. Should we use the word gouging? So it's interesting to see some of the things that the federal government is doing. So the interesting thing is, do you start there? My opinion, you do not. You start locally. You start to make change at a scale where you can recognize the change, where you can actually do the change, where you can actually implement it. Maybe your municipals are not playing along initially, but when you do things that are interesting and they work because you've talked to people in your communities, your locality, you can start chipping away at some of the smaller pieces. And if you can collaborate, we'll get to the collaboration part, but if you can collaborate with others, you'll start to say, oh, wait, we can actually affect change at the local level that people actually see, feel, taste, smell, etc. Those goals are attainable, I think. Working with local governments and agencies, the municipals, one might imagine that working with local governments, staff, related agencies and entities, non-governmental organizations, and so on in a given locality might draw some interest. They might say, ooh, volunteer time. And initially, depending on who you speak to in your city infrastructure somewhere, could be city staff, could be others, there may be oh, of course we want to support a nonprofit. Charity is good in our communities, etc. I don't know that the casual person generally knows what to do with that. For example, the Code for Vegas people who were here, there's one, Don Jacobson. I've mentioned him before. So Don Jacobson worked with Code for Vegas, with other people working with the city of Las Vegas. Now he is the only one who had that contact who works in the city organization. So when it came to, hey, we're going to reform Code for Vegas, when it came to supporting our efforts, guess who was right at the front of the line? When we spoke to other people, our city CTO, our urban economic development department, others, what are you guys doing exactly? Like, they didn't really grok it. So it was kind of an uphill battle that ended up being a little bit too steep. So time to take the shortcut, take the paths less investigated. Wasn't there a part of the 300 movie where the pass goes around and they were able to come in behind? Anyway, so in many cases, if not most, there are layers of bureaucracy. And of course, what is this exactly? Like, not a direct understanding. Usually it's and as pointed out in Recoding America, government tends to be procurement based, not action based. So find someone else to do things. So the process of identifying vendors and assigning tasks or requests for proposal is a popular one, RFPs. So, hey, we have this problem. Who wants to solve it? And we have funding and we have a list of demands, etc. So not quite used to engaging with volunteer time in a procurement mindset. So local government is almost certainly more efficient and more humanized than the layers above it. That is county government, state government, federal government, galactic powers that be. But there are empires to be built, constituencies to satisfy, donors to placate, and so on. This is true generally in all flavors of politics and so on. Making a case for working with volunteers on real projects may or may not be on the menu, but certainly I will not get an audience with the CTO of the federal government, even though I believe I know the deputy. CTO is not exactly the right title, but equivalent. But I could get an audience with the city of Las Vegas CTO, the head of disruption or whatever's on his business cards. So being able to speak directly to city council members, your local government, related agencies, and so on, makes for, I'll say, easier conversations, discussions, determination of what you're working with as far as support and interest and so on, and whether you want to spend time on that interaction, whether there's value to be had sooner or maybe later. The first step to proceed without some big name credibility, perhaps, that is, if you work for Google or if you are very financially enabled and you get a meeting with someone in a city or county level and you say, hey, here's a thing I want to drive. I want to make Hollywood 2.0 a real thing. I want to make Vegas the next Silicon Valley. The attention may be, you have money to inject into our economy. That will be good for when I come up for re-election or when I'm looking for some budget dollars and so on. You can always point to the successes. So money, big name, let's have it. Enabling local people, local residents to be volunteer contributors to community elevation projects without being paid or without being compensated as though it were a paying job. How do we do that exactly? So it's not always a piece of cake if you don't have a big cake to bring. The first step, like I said, though, proceed with some big name credibility perhaps, is identification of a champion. Quote, on the inside. So I mentioned Don Jacobson. I have probably spoken to Don more about our roadmap, our plans. He need not be burdened with our frustrations, but some inkling. So our champion has been identified. You should find yours. Someone who can at least put in a good word now and then. And it helps that Don was actually collaborating directly with Code for Vegas back in the day. Some 10, maybe it was 12 years ago. So if he can make a case for collaboration with a different way of thinking than the procurement with, and by the way, it's possible that procurement relationship would develop over time. But when you're talking about initial exploration of solutions, trying out ideas, especially in a place like Vegas, bent on being an innovation hub, there should be a way to enable that innovation to be shown and shared with the people of the greater Vegas area, our local communities. Central planning doesn't scale down. So how do we bottom up? History, whether of national economies or national civic volunteer organizations, tells us that top-down central planning does not scale and may struggle under its own weight without recognizing local challenges and possibilities. That is, they may just spend a lot of time trying to raise funds with larger projects, and they're not recognizing what's really happening and how real change or improvement or elevation could be happening by tackling local challenges. So you're only looking at the bigs, not necessarily looking at the smaller wins. We don't need to recreate this. So that's my personal issue with the Alliance of Civic Technologists, is that it's essentially trying to do the same thing. There's an Einstein quote, which was not actually an Einstein quote, that we all know, doing the same thing, expecting a different result, etc., etc. So we don't need to try this again. It's been done. So it doesn't scale down. What I mean is, by looking only at big projects to secure funding, donor, sponsor, some way of staying in business, quote unquote, in business. As a nonprofit, it's still, you got to keep the lights on. So it's tricky to do that if you're only looking for big wins, and managing little wins if you're going to centrally plan, centrally manage, have oversight. Part of the fiscal sponsorship responsibility, no doubt, is to be involved in some way or be aware. So you kind of made it difficult to be autonomous in that scheme. I don't know what levels of autonomy people had. I do know I was told I was too enthusiastic. Bottom up through a central organizing authority is similarly problematic. This is tricky with normal companies even. So if you have a big giant company and you try to have satellite groups and maybe they do their own thing, this is common. This was really common back in the .com era. Have you ever heard the one about the acqui-hired group? Like you're a startup, you're 5 people, 10 people, 50 people, whatever. You're a small company and you get acquired. And so you're hired as employees. So you're acqui-hired employees of the acquiring company. So maybe Google, or back in the day it would be Cisco. Cisco bought us, so now we're all Cisco employees. However, Cisco says, well, you're going to operate just as you were, but you'll just be employees of Cisco. So the acqui-hired group has all of the flexibility of its original startup operating mode with the resources of the now parent company. So all the flexibility of a startup with all the resources of a big company. You'd hear a variation of that often. And then there would be a quiet eye roll in case anybody was listening, anybody at that parent company. So it's rarely the way things go. You will always be caught up in big company bureaucracy, big company empire building, big company politics, big company business plans and budgeting and eventual cuts and moving around. So it's very difficult to follow that path. So being a part of some large organization, whatever it is, may seem like a good idea. I would have a different take on that. I would say the Alliance of Civic Technologists should have been a brand, or an access point, a point of contact, a marketing organization, a communication and public relations effort. So the Alliance of Civic Technologists, hey, we have a project that we'd like to work with some volunteers. Oh, okay, well, let's work through the project definition process. Let's get it all spelled out so people understand what the ask is, what the requirements are. Is there a timeline? If there are monies to be paid, you make that arrangement, and then you find civic volunteer organizations. That's just one idea. I'm just coming up with this right now, literally. But you don't manage the projects. You treat them as like subcontractors, vendors. So you say, hey, we need to accomplish this. Are there people in our civic volunteer network who would like to work on this? This is I've mentioned before, my interest and engagements with food truck owners, mobile vendors, small businesses on wheels. Whenever a company attempts to fill the role of booking agent, they will advertise themselves. So this is basically what I'm suggesting. They will advertise themselves as, hey, book a food truck for your company event, your lunch, your festival, whatever it is. What ends up happening, however, in order to be profitable, to maintain business, this entity must insert itself between clients and the food truck owners, the small businesses. And you'll see expressions like our food trucks, call one of our food trucks. So the entity, let's call it where's the food truck? So where's the food truck might insert itself into this relationship where instead of working directly, hey, I'm a small business person, I got into this business to talk to my customers, to interact and have some determination, maybe be autonomous. And then when you allow an entity to stand between you and your customers, that can complicate things. So I'm not saying that this notion would be ideal or even work, but rather than trying to organize and manage, and so that you must become a member, you have to sign up, there are board meetings, etc. Treating, if Where's the Food Truck were to just be an event planning organization, and it would say, okay, so you have an event, you're going to have 500 people. That's probably a 2 food truck event, maybe 2 plus a dessert truck. You want to, and it's here, it's city property, you need a permit or you don't, you're on a public byway, you are within the regulated distance from the front door of a restaurant, a brick and mortar restaurant nearby, et cetera, et cetera. So you can run through all that, qualify the event, and then farm it out to food trucks. So there is no our food trucks. You're simply brokering qualified leads and coordinating so that there isn't double booking and so on and so on. So that's a value add service. But if instead you become a manager of work, then you kind of end up back in the same box. That could be problematic. So as we have covered many times, empowering local cohorts to work locally and address local community elevation issues seems to be more realistic, perhaps more attractive even. The post-pandemic terrain, though, coupled with the recent rug pull, the sunsetting of the brigade program, makes the value proposition to a less interested population of potential civic volunteers, not to mention those disenfranchised and so disillusioned, makes this a really tough sell. Again, if you were just disappointed by the way things turned out, is it a matter of, well, do you want to do the same thing again? Do you even want to volunteer any of your time, effort, and expertise to work on these projects, or are you going to throw your hands up and be done with it? And to be honest, I would not blame someone for taking that route. I've had enough. I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to, work at a FANG company, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, change the letters around for Meta and Alphabet, of course. But yeah, I'm going to go, or now AI, I'm going to work at OpenAI or whatever. So if you have that option, great. But occasionally there will be someone who says, I do kind of want to give back a little bit. Well, rather than being centrally planned and managed by some paid employee somewhere else in a Zoom call, told what to do on a timeline because the municipal partner or partner in general, whoever it is, has these requirements and these needs and this timeline and expectations and so on. Well, what if your customer tells you what to do? Kind of like that, except your customers are people that you encounter every day. They're people in your neighborhoods. They're people in your cities. They're people you can actually speak to. You'll actually be able to see what happens when what you work on works. So yeah, the reason rug pull, the terrain as it is, makes a value proposition to a less interested population of potential civic volunteers. That is, just went through the pandemic, did the lockdowns, kind of driving my own thing now, not really into whatever. Not to mention those disenfranchised and so disillusioned, had reduced interest from potential municipal partners. So that is the other side of the coin. It looks like civic volunteerism is down. We don't want to rely on that too much. Or I'm new to this. I just got hired on after the pandemic when there was restaffing. I don't know anything about civic volunteer organizations and collaboration. So not only are fewer people taking action on an interest and potentially being a civic volunteer. And again, not only coders, so it could be anyone. Not only are fewer people pursuing that interest, and we saw that here in Vegas. Like I said, room full of people, never heard from again. Like, oh, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in that. Are you going to show up again? Probably not. So couple that with people who have now been disillusioned and are frustrated and tired and forget this, I'm going to go on to my other thing. And then couple that again with we don't know how to work with, we don't have any projects that would align with, we're not interested in working with civic volunteer organizations from the municipal side. Our pals are not necessarily inviting us in for meetings. And you end up with crickets. So I say start with one and start with why. To build or rebuild a cohort of civic volunteers near you, perhaps it makes sense to start with one person, which we're doing here in Vegas. And others are doing something similar with one or a very small group of, you could say, diehards, people who get it, as we are doing with Innovate for Vegas, like I said. So there may be tire kickers, which we had a lot of, or you may have seriously interested people who don't quite grok the intent. So they may say, I'm interested, but now what? The possibilities, the way they could participate, these are all questions that people would have. And if you're not ready with an answer, they kind of fade away. So this is something that can be problematic if you are one person or a small group. Taking the time to properly specify a project that indicates where work needs to be done can be tricky, because you can either try to work on the project or you can try to specify the project. If you have a municipal partner, if you have somebody that's driving the ask, that may be slightly easier, but you have to translate into that. You have to translate the ask, the project, the definition of the project, the goals, etc. You have to translate that into what do we want to do. It's like taking a book and turning it into a screenplay. Like, what do I need to do? How do I want to spend my time? And that's not always super easy to do. What is lost on some of the younger junior level, entry level volunteer folks who I've come across thus far, the notion that they can be a part of the determination. They can be participants in the process from start to finish. Like, what am I supposed to work on? Well, let us define that. Wait, aren't you just going to tell me what to do? That is real. That really does happen. And I think that's problematic because that doesn't really drive entrepreneurial innovation. It drives workers, not creators, not innovators. So that's slightly problematic, I think, my opinion. But it may be helpful to show rather than tell how things work by pursuing an achievable project as a demonstration. That is, hey, look, here's what we are trying to accomplish, rather than describing it. And I fell into this trap early on. Here's our big plans. Do you want to be a part of the big plans? How come there isn't more done already? That one always makes me wince. Or you need to do more so that I can participate. So what I was hearing was, I need to be told what to do. So interest in being a part of the determination, self-determinism. Like, here's the thing I want to work on, and here's why I want to contribute my time, effort, and expertise. Let me participate in how we can spell that out so that multiple people can join in on not only figuring out how we want to accomplish something, what each of us wants to do, and what we can derive from it, our return on an investment, so to speak. Let's all participate in it. And instead of that, it's tell me what to do. And if you're not ready with that, they disappear. So that's unfortunate. But the idea here is to show those possibly maybe interested people why they might want to follow through. Maybe they do want to stick around. They're just not completely familiar with or comfortable with or maybe even capable of the notion of starting with a blank whiteboard or a blank piece of paper or a blank screen. And I got news for you. Most things that are creative and innovative start that way. The thing that's telling you what to do is a gap or a need or an ask, right? I need this. Well, tell me how to do that. Well, I don't know how to do it. That's why I'm asking you. I'm asking your cohort of your colleagues to solve a problem. I can describe the problem. You have to come up with what to do. So that is a skill gap, which I think ends up being one of the returns on investment for anyone who participates in civic volunteer projects is, oh, now I know how to work with people. I know how to work with people who are not being paid to work on things. I'm working with people with various schedules, different skill levels, different interest areas, different focus on what they'd like to accomplish by participating. Some would participate all the time, sometimes not. So you kind of a trial by fire to learn how to work on projects across geographical boundaries, across time zones, across availability, across resource access. Like, we don't have infinite budget to spend on things. You're not being paid. We don't even have free food because we don't have sponsors, etc. So it's very much a startup mentality, entrepreneurialism, and that mindset come in handy. And so show and don't tell, so if one person like me or a small group, maybe 2 or 3 people, can launch something, a version 1 of something, and say, look, here's an example of what we're doing. It's real. You can use it. Those who might be interested, why do I want to follow through? And not just coders. So I've used this trick before. I'll do something that looks kind of ugly and show it to a person who wants to do UI design, user interface, or user experience design, or typography, or anyone who's interested in anything vaguely visual or artistic or aesthetic. And they'll say, oh my God, that's horrible. Let me fix that. I've done it and it works, and you get people to at least take a look. The Alliance of Civic Technologists, Recoding America, we should remember that not everything is code. Civic Technologists, that's technology. Recoding America, code for America. If you emphasize coding in tech, you may be leaving out people who want to test things. They want to write copy. They want to make videos and audios. They would like to design icons. They're interested in user interactions. They want to do marketing. They want to do project management. They would like to be involved in a project, but they're not coders. They're not tech. That's why I say, like, innovation can be in food. You can be a culinary master. You may not have any idea how to program anything or design a web page or anything like that. You're not a coder. Should you be left out? No, absolutely not. Not everything is code. Not everything is an app running on a mobile phone. The world is a bigger, more interesting place than that. And there are many ways to be a part of community elevation. Guess what? Part of that is co-creation. Talk to the people in a community, your neighborhood, your city, your county, wherever. Find out what is not working. Here's what we want to do. Here's what we've done so far. What do you think? Get some real feedback. This actually works. Co-creation is really a thing. Why do any of this? Why would one person want to do any of this solo? Believe me, I ask myself all the time. Without much support from the local municipals or anyone else, really. Why indeed? And when I say anyone else, I don't mean everyone else. I mean people are in the hood. Anyone but Don. We live in virtual times. The notion that we must be proximal to be productive has left the building. Even though Agile and Scrum really recommend being co-located, having in-person meetings, frequent stand-up meetings, etc., there is a new reality in the pandemic, post-pandemic times. If there's one take-home lesson from those times, it is exactly that. Needing to be proximal, in proximity, near. That's not a thing anymore. It's nice to be near people. Humans are social animals, so being near people, talking in person, those are fine. But to require them to build plans around that requirement is tricky. Our technology has been there for a long time, a while now. I worked at True Vision on video conferencing, video compression for video conferencing for AT&T and others. And this was in 1996. So these have been around for a while. They've only moved up a notch or two, and it's more accessible to the casual person. Our culture is getting there, so people are more used to it, and our mindset is somewhere in the middle. So we can do it, but there's still that angst, like, I think we should all be in the same room if we're going to do anything, especially if management. It is completely reasonable to ponder working with your local cohort virtually. This happened during the pandemic. Some people would just continue to work on projects, but they'd have a virtual meetup as time permits, without the need to conjure a meeting place or travel to and from and arrange the seemingly necessary victuals, which we hear a lot here in the Vegas area. Is there free food? If we must ask for our civic volunteers to lift a finger, let it be to click the join button with their mouse to our video meeting or similar. That minimizes the barrier to entry. Oh, I can just work from home. I can work on the project. I can meet with people. You can meet at different times, which we've always encouraged, even though that's not in effect at the moment since it's mostly one person here in Vegas. But in general, do we have to have one monolithic meeting, or can it be meeting when it makes sense, when it's needed? This is overly cynical, perhaps, but not far off. Asking people to do things, anything more than lifting a finger to click a mouse, is possible, but start small. Once we're meeting virtually, and meeting in person is still a good thing, like I said, when it can happen, I've always suggested that if you're working on some component project or a particular part of something and it makes sense, like maybe somebody doing your user interface and you would meet up, coffee shop, library, etc., and just spend an hour or two with a legal pad or a whiteboard if you have one, and just sketch out some ideas and bounce some ideas back and forth. Is that scheduled? Is that a weekly? No, that becomes cumbersome, especially for volunteer time, which is gold. Don't forget, gold. So you can't always find gold on a regular basis. When you do have that volunteer time, you should make the most of it. And that's what Agile for Volunteers is focused on. So as time and interest permits, get together in person or virtually. But it's not compulsory in any way. This is not scheduled meetings. You must attend. You must do this. You must do that. Be communicative. Let people know if you said you're going to show up and you don't, try to say something. Because again, volunteer time. This is something I find often. People treat volunteer projects as it's my volunteer time. It should be it's our volunteer time. If I don't show up, somebody else volunteered their time. Maybe they feel they've wasted their time, et cetera, et cetera. So being aware of that interdependency is not always a gimme. Do we need to focus on people in our locality to collaborate, though, on projects to elevate our locality? When people, and so I mean our neighborhoods and cities and so on, when people in other localities might be doing the same thing, or they may have the same challenges. Maybe they've not yet started and you are halfway through something. So I say, let our pals catch up to us. We've covered Project Act previously on this channel in a previous audio program at some point, maybe 2 or 3. I can't remember now. Project Act is underway, and we are beginning to reach out to tease the idea of real decentralized network graph. Graph is a connection between nodes. Some people, if you're a maths person, you know that a graph is an illustration or visualization of nodes and edges. So a bar graph, those are charts, bar chart. It's a little mathematical aside. So there's a network graph that connects, communicates, and collaborates. Or they could if they could connect. So if there are various former brigades and aspiring and nascent cohorts and maybe individuals who are not yet, like, hey, I know I'd like to participate in something, but Code for America's gone. Now what? So if you can actually connect, discover, and participate in projects without a central planning authority, so you might just want to maybe a pull request on GitHub, or maybe, I speak another language. Do you need any help translating? Or, hey, I know my way around user interface design, or I know I'm interested in project management, or how do I help make the most of that volunteer time, effort, and expertise, right? So if we can connect on similar projects or points in local projects that might overlap. So maybe we're working on open transit and you're working on like a bike share program. So knowing where stops are, knowing where, the bikes are here, bus stop is there, proximity, stats, like how many bikes are there, how often does the bus come by? There are possible points of collaboration, right? So, maybe it's something that's sort of related, but not specifically related, but we might benefit by collaborating. That's usually true, right? We work together across distances. Perhaps we can move the needle or the needles. We don't have to be in the same room or the same city or the same state. As the saying goes, so this is that quote, remember? It's easier to ask forgiveness than to get permission. So rather than going to your local municipality and asking, hey, do you want to work on this project? Is there something that we can work on together, etc.? Why not go to the people you encounter on the regular, that is your neighborhood, your friends, your colleagues, your fellow bus riders, etc., or et al., I should say. Find out what they need, what they think, hey, what's broken? What would make this easier? And by the way, I've done that. And people are eager to tell. You know what I would fix? There's always something. There's always something that somebody can throw in to the mix, how to make something better, and then consider fixing it. That could be a project right there. And then again, remember, other people in other places are probably saying something similar. You could be collaborating, even though you're not part of the same organization or cohort. You can just say, oh, if we're going to spend time on this, how about if I take this part, you take that part? Or, hey, let's fix this piece of something together. Or, the list goes on. The ways to collaborate, to pair program, or the equivalent for not coding. Hey, here's some ideas for user interface. Oh, I found that the button in that placement is difficult for someone who has limited vision, right? So why ARIA considerations? Web accessibility initiative, is that it? I can't remember. WAI-ARIA. Why ARIA is digital accessibility standards, right? Make sure that people riding the bus, they may not have good vision. That's a real problem, by the way, with the transit app used in Vegas. So it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to get permission. So don't wait for your municipals. Do it anyway. Work with people in other places and collaborate. Get it done across different places. Oh, now we have different people that can try out different ideas under different circumstances, and we can make our collaboration even better by having these different perspectives from different places. And in a place like Vegas, where we have 40 million people visiting every year, that's correct. I've checked the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. So 40 million people from all kinds of different places. What if we could show and share what we're working on? Open transit. People come here, they ride the bus, they use the bus system. I haven't asked everyone, but 100% of the people I did talk to are frustrated and disappointed with getting around via public transportation here in Vegas. It could be done better. We can do it here, and what we learn here, we can apply in other places. So don't limit the effort to here, but we can certainly deploy it here and in other places, a better way of working with the public transit system. That's why one of our projects, our first one in fact, is called Open Transit. The missing piece for some is getting some coverage. Like if you work on something and nobody knows you spent your time and your expertise and your effort, then you have to be able to derive personal satisfaction. That's critical. So, but once you've developed something and you want people to try it, you want people to know about it, getting your local news media, your local bloggers, your local influencers to be interested can be a real challenge. Getting the word out, generally making sure that people realize that there really are ways to make things happen without waiting on the powers that be. So if people don't know, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound? We can throw that around too. So if you do all this work and nobody notices, does it matter? Well, yes, it matters, of course. But the best way to get the word out is to have channels or make them to get the word out. Maybe it's an Instagram account, though here in Vegas anyway, if you're a foodie, if you're staying in hotels and resorts, if you're checking out the latest gambling or for entertainment residences, if you're in the fun economy, then maybe, but you're going to get lost in the shuffle. There's a ton of influencers, but something maybe creative. So that's why our project, My Muni, is aimed at my municipality. So we can work with our municipals. Now we can work with the people that live here on an information sharing platform. How do you discover things? So for step one, hey, we made this platform powered by Innovate for Vegas volunteers from Vegas and elsewhere, or however we would make that statement. So here's everybody that's enabling this platform. And here's how you'll have an easier time finding information. Hey, where should I go to vote? Where are the polling places? So where would you look for that? Just Google polling places, my polling place. It should be a lot easier if we're a smart city and Everything I've read says we are. But if we're going to be a smarter smart city, we can actually make it easier to discover this information. And we can think outside the box. We don't have to follow traditional journalism, structure, article structure, the inverted pyramid, the lead, the deck, the tease, all that stuff I was saying earlier. You can provide information using modern tools like maps and timelines and graphs and charts and other ways of presenting information to people who may not be able to see it or maybe don't speak your language. 40 million people do not speak English and Spanish, and that's the two languages, according to our U.S. Census data, that entities in the Greater Vegas area will focus upon. I believe Tagalog is number 3, and then all those visitors are speaking all manner of languages. I have helped people speaking Japanese, Polish, Spanish to some degree. What was another one? There was somebody else. But there have been several. People who don't speak English or Spanish are kind of left to their own devices, and localization to any particular language is a problem that's been solved, so we should be doing that. We're a destination city after all. And this doesn't apply to only Vegas. It can be anywhere. So there's just the tip of the iceberg in this, the things I've talked about. So not everything is code. Wait, did I finish up the Mississippi's? Powers that be, right. Okay, so while we're at it, so I'm going to wrap up now. We're at the end. Let's not forget the value of volunteer time, like I said. Effort and expertise. Attribution always given. Input and insight always received. And even heeded sometimes. But these are collaboration projects. This is not a hierarchy of paid management and 40-hour work weeks, etc. Volunteer time has to be respected and valued. And that means that volunteers volunteering their time have to respect the time of others. So everybody's kind of in the same boat, on the same playing field, on the however you want to look at it. You volunteering with other volunteers means you're kind of all in it together. Be observant, be aware. Volunteer time, gold. And when it comes to figuring out what you're going to do, you collaborate. You're not being told what to do. You're being asked, what should we do? Not everything is code. As it is most projects in the real world, even when they are a lot of software development, still need, even require non-software development. User interface and user experience design, actual talent, creating graphics or icons or video or audio. Like, I can make things. Are they great? You tell me. Attention to accessibility and, of course, language localization. So the why ARIA stuff I said, the internationalization and localization, translation between languages. Localization includes things like left to right, right to left, top to bottom, text layout. Something as simple as whether you use a comma or a period as the radix mark for decimal numbers, etc. $sign versus £sign, right? So localization is about tailoring content to a particular locality. For us, since we'd be focusing mostly domestic, it's slightly easier, but if you take that into account, you're not limiting yourself to domestic, and then you can collaborate with more people in more places, and the list goes on. Volunteers managing volunteers to make the most of that volunteer time, effort, and expertise. So that's like project management, but again, all together. You're not being told what to do, but somebody needs to coordinate things. Marketing, storytelling, generally making sure that the people know, the people out and about, the civilians, the people know that such power is being put to good use, the power of civic volunteerism and the desire to elevate communities and make things better with time, effort, and expertise to be used for good. So getting the word out, being aware that these things are even happening. And that is not an easy thing to accomplish in a place like Las Vegas, unless you happen to be tearing down a resort or a casino. Maybe you're building a stadium or acquiring a professional sports team, tearing up some streets, cutting down trees at Bellagio. You really got to make it a big impact to get some headlines. Another famous quote to end on, I don't know who said this, but I didn't know I couldn't do that. Now swap in we to we's, actually. We didn't know we couldn't do that. And get in the habit of turning ideas into action, which is not every local government entity. It's not always the first thing on their list, right? They're not always capable of of doing in human time the things that we hope that they will accomplish. That's why people often get frustrated even with their local governments. And then they lash out on silly platforms like Nextdoor or Twitter, etc. Get into the habit of showing and maybe telling far and wide so that people can say, oh, I guess you guys are doing some pretty cool stuff and solving real problems. And that is when your municipals might come to you. Wow, that was a long one. I've done episodes of one of my 4 weekly programs that are about, it's not extra long. And I'm seeing an hour and 33 minutes. I will hope that I didn't, because I've paused a couple of times to take a drink of water, etc. I'm hoping that there was not an instance where I paused and didn't resume recording mistakenly. That happened once a couple of weeks ago. Luckily, I noticed it, but this time I didn't notice. If I did, I apologize. If there's a big gap where I change subjects out of nowhere, that's entirely possible. Such is life. I'm sure I will talk about this again. We got plenty of stuff going on, not with Vegas collaboration. We're working on the components of Project ACT to encourage collaboration across localities so that you don't all have to be in the same place, but you can share ideas, share effort, time, expertise, and go from there. So that's all. That's all I got. Visit our homepage, innovateforvegas.org. Don't forget, we are a actual Nevada nonprofit. We're a 501c3 public charity. If you would care to support our efforts financially, consult your tax professional, but we are a 501c3 nonprofit, tax exempt, tax deductible donations. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you legal or tax filing advice, but we are a tax exempt organization in good standing. We're in the IRS tax exempt organization database. If you look us up, Innovate for Vegas Foundation. That's all I got for you today. Let's do this. Let's do cool stuff and let the municipals catch up. Cheers.